for this free concert talk. Tonight we have the artistic director of MIRYAM, Alicia DePaolo. And in addition, we have Dr. Devin Nelson, an associate professor at IU, visiting assistant professor, excuse me, and board member Dr. Devin Nelson here for a conversation. Please enjoy this conversation. Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone. Welcome Alicia and MIRYAM back to Bloomington, both since your degree and since last year's festival. So we have a new festival theme this year, Crossroads. You explained in your program notes that this program we have tonight, SHIR, LEVI'IM, connects to our theme journeying. Specifically the journey of the Jewish people from Spain and Portugal, their dispersion and travel after the Inquisition, and the music of the synagogue in Amsterdam, where many of them settled later on. And so I see that the timing of this concert is actually quite nice for the timing of our yearly cycle of Torah reading, as this past week we began reading from Bamidbar, the Book of Numbers, in which the Israelites traveled through 42 different destinations. So how do we understand this theme and program and musical works in it through journeying in several different contexts, connecting Torah, the early modern period in which these works were written, and
Thank you so much for those questions, Devin. Can I watch your video, please? Yes. Great, thank you. So I was so excited when I heard the theme of this year's festival, because Crossroads really perfectly describes what we're trying to do with MIRYAM. What we try to do is find these liminal spaces between where cultures interact with each other, because I think that's in that intersection is where we find such a beautiful, fruitful dialogue, and where there's real creativity and growth. And so in particular, for our ensemble, we're looking at where Jewish communities interact with cultures in particular geographical communities and at specific points in time. And it's been one of the most rewarding and fruitful explorations to be able to explore life and history and culture through music. That's our particular point of view. And so this year, when we heard about the festival theme, I started thinking about Crossroads. And I was really inspired by the poetry of Yehuda Halevi, who was a medieval Spanish poet who wrote these absolutely stunning mystical poems that many of you may be familiar with. He's a well-beloved poet. And he lived during the golden age of all beliefs. If you've been coming to concerts this whole week, you've heard all the riches from this period and from this place. What an incredibly amazing confluence of culture and intellect and art and poetry and music. So his poetry really represents this synergy between Hebrew and Arabic styles of music and poetry. And so that kicked off the idea. Before, in the past, around 2018 and 2019, we've explored this stunning repertoire from the Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam, which makes up the entire middle bulk of the program. But we were excited to experience that in a new light through this theme and framed with the poetry of Yehuda Halevi. And so I was very inspired by the theme to compose 3 new pieces to frame the music from the Portuguese synagogue to think about this crossroads, starting all the way back from temple worship at the first temple period in ancient Jewish history, all the way to the golden age of Al-Andalus, and then following those refugees from the Inquisition in Spain and Portugal to a new Jewish community in Amsterdam. So that was the inspiration for the program.
Fantastic. So let's talk a bit more about the synagogue in Amsterdam, known as the Synagogue. It had a lot of music written for it, much of which we'll hear tonight, and some of which we actually have surviving, which is not always the case. And this is thanks to the beautiful library that they have, one of the longest running in Jewish history. So what can we know about the life and activities of the synagogue in the early modern period specifically from this library as well as from its music?
Yes. So as you said, this is an incredible library, and I just want to give them a big shout out and a big thanks, because they've been incredible at allowing us to use a lot of their materials and resources. And recently they've actually digitized a huge collection of their manuscripts. So you can go on their website. I'll post the link on the MIRYAM website if you want to take a look. They have just pages and pages of theological discourses and music and medical treatises and scientific treatises, and it's just an absolute testament to the intellectual and artistic life of this community. So I think what we can learn from that is that they were incredibly, they held the values of intellectual inquiry very highly, which, as we know, is a theme in Jewish life: inquiry, questioning, and using that knowledge to figure out how to live meaningfully. And then, of course, music was a huge part of this community. And I think what is just so special and unique about the Portuguese synagogue and the community in Amsterdam is they experienced ritual Jewish life through a particular musical style that was popular in the region. And what's unusual about that is that at other points in history, in other communities, musicians have run afoul of the rabbinic authorities at various points, got into some trouble. But here, it was a very different case. And we're seeing that the community loved music so much that they commissioned this music for all of their important life cycle events to commemorate the building of the synagogue, for holidays. A number of our pieces were written for Simchat Torah, which, if you've observed before, it's the holiday that marks the end of the last reading, the last portion of the Torah, and then the beginning again of the first portion. It's a very joyful celebration. Nowadays, we take out all of our Torah scrolls and dance around the synagogue with them, and then we unscroll the entire Torah, and everyone supports it and holds it up a little bit, and it spans around the entire sanctuary, and you can see our entire history laid out. And so when you hear that piece tonight, you can hear that joy and that communal celebration of storytelling and memory and being able to preserve stories through text and through music.
It's fantastic. So wonderful that they've digitized all of this as well. So yeah, I encourage you to go to MIRYAM's website and see that link to their library and more. So speaking of some of these important texts, some of these texts on the program might be familiar to some people in the audience through more modern settings. In your experience of these texts, both in what you're performing tonight and in other settings, how do these settings compare, these different musical versions? Maybe some of the examples we might know from other contexts.
Of course. And forgive me if I could go back for one moment to your previous question. I wanted to give a shout out to a wonderful musicologist that I met this week. And I think one of the great things about festivals like this is it puts performers in dialogue with musicologists, which is such a fruitful collaboration, and neither of us can do the work we do without the other. And so I want to give a shout out to, if you are interested in learning more about this repertoire, you should follow the research of Paul Heller, who is doing some really fascinating research that calls into question the authorship of the repertoire attributed to Lidarti. And he's raising the possibility that there may be another local Jewish composer who was at large during that time. I was fascinated by this research, and he'll be publishing soon, so I encourage you to follow him and to learn more. And I'm very grateful for this community so that we can share these ideas together.
Absolutely, that's how we learn more about all of this, right? More about these sources, more about how to interpret them and hear them in new ways.
Absolutely.
So going back to the text, how can we hear these texts in musical settings in new ways?
Absolutely. So I wanted to highlight just a few texts that you may be familiar with if you've ever been in a Jewish service in a synagogue. So you'll hear one line from Lecha Dodi, which is a very beloved hymn poem, often set to music, to many different tunes. And it's sung at Kabbalat Shabbat, the evening service on Friday night, which welcomes Shabbat, so the day of rest. And it's all about this idea of personifying the spirit of Shabbat, which is called the Sabbath Bride. So in this piece that you'll hear, it's called Boi B'Shalom. It's the very last line, come in peace, Boi B'Shalom, Ateret Bala, crown of her spouse. So this idea of the day of rest is this gift It is a gift of love. And so you may be familiar with that text, but you'll hear it in a completely different setting tonight, which I was just flabbergasted when I came across it. It's stunning, and I think you'll really enjoy hearing Hilary sing it. Another one I wanted to mention is Kol HaNeshama. So it's a line from Psalm 150, which is often included in Psuke de Zimra, which is part of the morning prayers. And the line that you'll be hearing in the Vidarti setting is Kol HaNeshama Tehalelia, which means let everything that has breath or life praise the eternal, praise God. And this is set to the most exuberant, beautiful, joyful music that I think I've ever heard with that text. It's really fun to sing, and I think you'll enjoy hearing it too.
So these are the second and third pieces on the program.
Correct.
Excellent.
And then, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with the Kaddish as well. So the mourner's Kaddish is the prayer that's traditionally recited when you are mourning a loved one. It can be at the period of a yahrzeit, a year since a loved one's passing, or in the period of Shoshim, the 30 days that mark their passing, or if you're just feeling particularly close to them and remembering them on a particular service where you're with your community. And so I was inspired by the Rossi setting of the Kaddish Shalem, the whole Kaddish, to write a new setting specifically for this program.
Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about Rossi for those of
Yes, absolutely.
our audience that may not be familiar?
Yes. So Rossi was absolutely stunning, a late Renaissance Italian Jewish composer, which we already have in the works another program to share some of his music with you, so stay tuned. And one of my favorite pieces by Rossi is a setting of the Kaddish Shalem, so the whole Kaddish, the long version. And it is in a fast triple meter. It feels like a dance, it's joyful, it's vibrant. So the Kaddish, although it is recited for mourning, has no mention of death in the entire prayer. It's just about praise, about song and thankfulness. It has about 7 different words for praise and exaltation. And it's just a cascade of joy. And so I think yeah, thanks. And I've always just felt that the Rossi setting just really highlights that. And I've always just been so moved by it. And so I wanted to create something that was inspired by that for this event.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So, speaking of your own compositions, we're going to hear 2 world premieres tonight of yours. So, as a composer, you've really added to this long tradition of setting these texts, and as we were speaking of journeys, continuing this journey of the texts. How do you see your performing and composing activities in dialogue with these traditions we've been talking about, these other composers? What went into your compositional process in the pieces that you prepared for tonight?
It's been a really powerful process. So I would say since I started looking more deeply at the poetry of Yehuda Halevi and just thinking about this program, it's made me feel just really connected to our history and to my ancestors. And it's been a really sacred experience to dwell in these texts. And so I would say a lot of my compositional process came out of just really experiencing the words. And my first try at trying to set it to music was just an improvisation that came out of my response to reading the poetry. And I tried to just allow myself to be present with it and see how I responded to it. And from there, I notated that and just took some themes and wove them into the other 2 pieces. So the first and the last piece they're technically listed as 2 separate pieces, but they're related to each other. And I chose to use them to frame the program, actually on a suggestion from one of our ensemble members, which I also wanted to just give them a huge shout out through this whole process because when I brought these pieces kind of in progress to them, they had some amazing ideas about how to place them in the program to really help bring the theme together. And I'm really grateful to our harpsichordist Juan Mesa, who is a music theory and continuo genius, you will hear.
That's a technical label.
It is, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, and so I think the collaboration aspect of this program has also been just really wonderful and joyful as well, to feel like everybody has a hand in thinking about how we relate to this music and how to present it.
That's Fantastic. It sounds like a very communal process amongst your group, and this inspiration of improvisation seems very well connected to your own training in historical performance and the creative processes of the Renaissance and the Baroque period as well.
Thanks.
Can I spring something on you a
Yes.
little bit? So I'm curious if you're continuing, I know you're starting rabbinical school soon. I'm curious if you're interested in continuing to connect your musical performance and composing activities as you continue on in your studies.
Yes, absolutely. So my main goal in my rabbinate is to continue to deepen my relationship with Jewish music. And so absolutely, it's all part of the vocation and the dream. And my vision at this point is to really continue to figure out how I fit in this lineage of Jewish thinkers and composers. I think when you look at the rabbis of the Talmud, they charged us with figuring out how to live in modern times and make sense of Jewish text in a way that makes it living and breathing. And I think music is a text as well, and so that applies. So my goal is just to stay open to studying the work of all of those amazing thinkers who came before us and to continue to make meaning, both through interactions with colleagues and through just experiencing Jewish learning and music.
Fantastic. Well, it sounds like you've already studied and considered a lot of how you fit into this history. I mean, you mentioned specifically with the connection to Rossi in your own settings. So I think I very much look forward to hearing what will come from all of your studies and how you will bring that to your music and your audiences. So we should give you some time to get ready, especially as a vocalist. So if you could join me in thanking Alicia, I'm very much forward to this program.
And thank you, Devin.